Welcome back, darlings, to the podcast Life Looks Different Now. I'm your host, Slandy, Noel. In this podcast, we focus on reading one chapter from the Bible every week, doing our best to decipher the Word of God, learning its rules, its laws, its principles, and apply them to our daily lives. Last week, we read from Genesis chapter 11. And from reading Genesis chapter 11, we learned that here on earth, every single person spoke only one language. Even after the flood, everyone was speaking only one language. Every single, groups, every single tribes were speaking one language. And at some point, these individuals, these rebellious individuals, decided not to follow God's commandment to go forth and multiply the earth. They decided to come together to build a city in a tower that reached all the way up to the heavens. So they could no longer rely on God. Frankly, they didn't trust that God will never again destroy the planet through a flood. So they wanted to make sure that they were prepared for next time God decided to destroy the planet. They didn't trust God. They didn't trust the covenant that God made between himself and Noah and all of his descendants. They took matters into their own hands. They built a tower. And when God came here on earth and saw the city and the tower and knew men's intentions, God decided to make every single tribe speak their own language. And at that point, they could no longer work together. They had to give up the idea, give up the project. And that tower is now called the Tower of Babel. We also learned that God are now using Shem's descendants. Shem is one of Noah's sons. Now remember, Noah had three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Shem's descendant is now the one that God, the chapter is really focusing on. And we learned that Shem ended up having a grandchild, Terah, and Terah is the father of Abram. We also learned that Terah was traveling with his family to go to Canaan, but he never made it to Canaan. He died en route, and he was buried in Haran. And we also learned that Abram's wife, Sarai, was barren. She couldn't have children. Let's see what Genesis chapter 12 have to teach us this week. Let's see what we can learn from the chapter. Before I go ahead to reading Genesis chapter 12, I have a favor to ask. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. As you and I are eager to learn the Word of God, others want to do the same. Please give them the gift of knowledge by sharing this channel with them. And you will also help this channel to grow as well. Thank you in advance for your support. Now let's get back to reading Genesis chapter 12. The call of Abram. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, in your kindred, in your father's house, to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonor you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and all the people they had acquired in Haran. And they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At the time, the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built there an altar to the Lord, who had appeared to him. From there, he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, still going toward the Negeb. Now, there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai, his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And when the prince of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house, and for her sake he dealt well with Abram. And he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, and male servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go. And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. Wow, there is a lot going on in Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 12 is a very important chapter. The reason why this chapter is so important is because it is the turning point in the book of Genesis. In this chapter, we see that God binds himself to his people through Abram. The chapter opens with letting us know that God chose Abram. The chapter didn't tell us that Abram was a special man. The chapter didn't tell us that Abram was a servant, necessarily a servant of God, and that he was better than the rest. The chapter just let us know that God chose Abram, which tells us that God chose Abram by pure grace. You see, at the beginning of Genesis chapter, of Genesis, after Eve and Adam sinned and sin entered the world, God made a promise to Eve that through her seed, her descendants will crush the head of the serpent. So we know through Eve, Christ will come. The Messiah will come. And even after the flood, God still holds his promises, because God blessed Noah and his children and let them know that there will always be a covenant. Christ will be coming through that line. And God is using the lineage of Shem to have Christ come. And listen, Abram is the great-grandchild of Shem. God chose Abram and told Abram to go where he will be leading him. So Abram made a home in Terah, where his father Terah died and buried. And God now is calling this man who is 75 years old, who is living a very comfortable life. Because as we can see here, Abram had wealth. He had servants, he had slaves, he had a lot of possessions. Yet God is telling this 75-year-old man, who is an old man, even for this time, he was old. Because remember, people's lifespan has shortened to about 120 years. That man was 75 years old, so he was very old, living a comfortable life. And God is calling him to leave behind where he had made a home for himself, to go forth without even knowing where exactly he's supposed to be going to. And what did Abram do? Abram listened to what God told him to do. He trusted God and he went forth. But God made 3 promises to Abram. The first promise God made to Abram was that he will make a great name out of Abram's name. That is the first promise. The second promise is that God told Abram that he will make his descendants great. Now listen, remember that Abram's wife, Sarai, is barren. The woman, his wife, is barren, yet God is telling him that his descendants will be great. And listen, Abram did not even question it. He trusted God and believed in his promise. And the third promise that God made to Abram is that he will bless all the people here on earth through Abram. This man who was living a comfortable life in Tehran had everything, every possession, who is middle-aged at best. I mean, he was an elderly man, 75 years old. And God is calling on him to go forth. And what did he do? He just listened. He obeyed God. And he went forward. Now, the word here, the chapter here, didn't tell us whether or not God had spoken to Abram before. The Bible doesn't tell us. It simply said that God told him to get up and go. And he got up, he took his wife, and he took his nephew Lot, and he went forth to the land that God is going to show to him. And then we learned later on that after Abram left Tehran, journeying on, God brought him to the land of Canaan. And the word tells us that God went to Abram. God went to Abram to talk to Abram. Now, we don't know how God appeared to Abram. We don't know. But we know that God appeared to him. And God told him that the land of Canaan, where he was on at the moment, is going to be given to him and his descendants. Now, this is what's interesting about all this. Canaan, the land of Canaan itself, was already occupied. There were different groups of people living on that land. And mind you, Abram was not a warrior. He was not a soldier. He was not a government official. He didn't have an army behind him, that he could have commanded to take over this land. Yet he trusted God. He believed what God said that he will do, that he was going to do it. And what did Abram do? He built an altar in Bethel. He built an altar for the Lord. He built an altar for the Lord where he can praise God for what's to come. Because that land was fully occupied. There was no physical way for Abram to take the land. Yet he trusted, he obeyed, and he believed in what God said. And then the text proceeded to tell us that Abram continued to travel south toward the desert, the populated desert of Negeb. He continued traveling on, which tell us that there must have been a reason why he continued to travel. And unfortunately, we learned that there was a famine. There was a famine in the land. So Abram and his family and his, workers and his nephew, everyone had to keep on migrating. And then, of course, they learned that Egypt had everything they needed. They needed food, they needed water and other necessities. And Egypt could accommodate them. Because had they stayed in the land of Negeb, they would have died. So they understood that they had to continue to travel and head on to Egypt to get their daily necessities, to buy the things they needed. But what's interesting about what happened next is that although Abram trusted God and obeyed God when God told him to leave Terran and travel forth with his family and all of their possessions, he obeyed God. He trusted God. Yet when he got to Negeb and he noticed there was a famine, and he knew that he had to travel to Egypt to get the daily necessities, to buy the things they needed, he then conjure up this lie with his wife. He decided on a scheme. Now remember, Sarai is his wife. But then the text tells us that this woman was a beautiful woman. And Abram acknowledged that his wife was a very beautiful woman. And he acknowledged that she will be noticed, that the Egyptians will take notice of her beauty, and he might get killed. And what did he do? He came up with this scheme. And he told his wife to lie for him, to let the Egyptians know that she was his sister. And you know what's interesting about this is that Sarai was actually his sister. Now, yes, she was his wife, but she was also his half sister. And as we continue on reading forward, we're going to learn that to be true. We're going to learn that she is indeed his half sister. She is the daughter of his father, Terah, who died. But they have two different mothers. They had the same father. Apparently in those times, people were marrying their sisters. It was acceptable, I suppose, because remember, God did tell him to populate the earth. So you would think that, given that there were so many people on the land all over the earth, that maybe Abram could have taken someone else for his wife, but he didn't. He took his half-sister as his wife. And he tried to manipulate the Egyptians. For his own protection, he asked his wife to lie for him. And she did. And you know what's interesting about all this is, yes, that was his wife, but that was his sister, but it was also his wife. But I suppose because Abram had conjured up the scheme, that could have been one of the reasons why the Egyptians even took notice of Sarai in the first place. Because you see, when we know something and we try to manipulate it and we fail to trust God, and we come up with our own solutions. I suppose it is not unusual for us to get caught in our own lie. We get caught in our own lie. Now, Abram knew that he was trying to manipulate the Egyptians. He lied by saying this woman was only his sister and not his wife. But here's a side note. Abram was 75 years old, and his wife, Sarai, was 65 years old. She is 10 years younger than he was. She was 10 years younger than he was. And what's interesting is the text is letting us know that this woman was so beautiful. Even at 65, everyone could notice how beautiful she was. Which tells us that beauty is ageless. Now, I know we live in a society that tells us the only people who are beautiful are the young people. That once you hit middle age, you are over the hill, you're over the cliff, you are no longer beautiful, you're no longer important, you're no longer, attractive, and nobody wants you, and you are in no man's land. But Genesis chapter 12 here is letting us know that that is pure lie. It's pure lie. That is the devil trying to manipulate women to think less of themselves and not understand their value. Genesis chapter 12 is letting us know that this woman was 65 years old, but she was so beautiful that everyone took notice of her. And unfortunately, upon entering Egypt, Abram's fear was justified. It was justified. I suppose when you lie, you are trying to deceive people. His deception is about to be uncovered. Yes, they are entering Egypt. He reported that Sarai is his sister. But because of her great beauty, everyone took notice, and they reported her beauty to the Pharaoh. And since the Pharaoh heard that this woman is so beautiful and she was unmarried, just traveling with her brother, the Pharaoh took Sarah as his wife. Ouch. Now, Abram did not expect that to happen. He didn't expect that his wife will be taken away from him and end up getting married to some other man. And unfortunately, that's what happened. The Pharaoh didn't know that this woman was married, and he took her in and he laid with her. Where was the protection? Now, husbands are supposed to protect their wives. Clearly, Abram fell short. Sorry, not sorry. Someone has to say it. A husband who just allow his wife to be taken from him, to be married off to someone else. Now, mind you, he didn't trust God. He could have trusted God that he will be protected, that God will take care of him. But he didn't trust God. He went ahead with a deception, and now he lost his wife. His wife is taken away from him and had to lay with another man. Ouch, ouch, double ouch. I cannot even imagine how he felt, helpless, standing there, not knowing what's going on, and then his poor wife to be used that way. Come on. This poor woman she now had to lay with somebody else who was not her husband. That's just tragic. And Pharaoh rewards Abram with great possessions. Pharaoh gave him, camels and servants, male servants, female servants, and all of these, cows and all these possessions, sheeps and all, because he thought that he was basically rewarding this brother for having married to his sister. But that's not what happened. And of course, Abraham had to take all these possessions. What was he? In a way, he kind of like sold his wife to the Pharaoh. Someone has to say it. That's basically what Abram did. I mean, I suppose nobody is perfect. Not even Father Abram. Nobody is perfect. And he's in a moment of weakness. He conjured up a scheme, a deception, and now him and his wife had to pay the consequences. His poor wife had to pay the consequences of that lie. And of course, what did God have to do? Now, God had to step in and save this man and his wife, because the Lord had to take that step when showing that his agenda for Abram to succeed, for Abram's descendant to succeed, had to take place. So God stepped in and put a plague on Pharaoh's house. See, sometimes we put ourselves in a pickle. You know, we know what to do and what not to do, but we choose to disobey, or out of our faith, out of whatever, we do our own thing. And then, you know, after we go about doing our own thing, God then had to step in and save us and rescue us from our own deception, from our own scheme. Because remember, God chose Abram by pure grace, not because he was a perfect man, but because God just chose him. I know it's very hard for a lot of us to believe, because those of us who believe in fairness, oh, everything has to be fair, everything has to be equal. I hate to say it. Even the Bible is telling us here, showing us that there's no such thing. There is no such thing as fairness and everyone has to be on the same level. No, there isn't. Because God clearly chose this man, Abram, not because he was special, not because there was anything important about him, but because God chose him, because God wanted to. Pure grace indeed. And God now had to step in to save this man from his own transgression, just like God oftentimes has to step in and save us from our own selves, from our own schemes. God put a plague on Pharaoh's house. And that's when Pharaoh discovered the truth. And of course, the Pharaoh was mad, understandably so, because he just paid for this woman, believing that this woman was Abram's sister. And now he had to discover that he has been lied to. And because the Pharaoh was fearful of God, he let Abram go with his wife and told him to get out of his city, to never come back to his city again. Get out of the city. Take your wife, take your possessions, take everything you need and get out. And the Pharaoh gave orders to his men, to his people, and to let Abram, depart from Egypt with his wife, his family. Very interesting story. This chapter here is a turning point, and this chapter affects every single one of us here on humanity, every single one of us here on earth, because of God, chose to choose one man to carry out his plan for the world. Because remember, God said through Abram, he's going to bless every single person here on earth. And God had to ensure that takes place, because God's word always come true. What he said that he will do, he will do. And we don't get to stand in the way of God's work. So what did we learn from reading Genesis chapter 12? We learned that, yes, there is such a thing as being a chosen one. Yeah. And if you're looking for equality and everything has to be fair, everyone has to be on the same level, sorry, darling. This is not what Genesis chapter 12 is showing us. But it's also letting us know that it's only pure grace, by pure grace, that we get chosen. That God can work through any of us. If God can work through Abram, God can work through you, God can work through me. We just have to stop and listen to when he speaks. We just have to obey his words and trust that he is going to do what he said that he will do. So I hope you learned something new from Genesis chapter 12 this week, because I know I have. I know that, I learned that we all fall short in the eyes of God, that even Abram, who was a chosen man, fell short and ended up putting his own wife in danger. His poor wife was just then sold to Pharaoh, given away to lay with another man. I'm sure it was tragic for Abram to have to sit there and watch that, but that was his scheme. He had to pay the consequences of that. So you and I have decisions to make. Every minute of our lives, every second of our lives, every hour, we're making decisions. And those decisions do affect us in every way. Just like I've always said, every week, we're learning that our decisions do affect us in a positive way or negative way. Either way, and not only does it affect us, it also affects our surrounding, our friends and families, and our descendants. So we have to be mindful when we do things and we say things. The best we can try to do is try to live our lives with integrity, with great character, and try not to lie to save our own skin, right? But either way, in any case, we are human beings. We do all fall short. So I hope you learned something this week. And next week, we're going to be reading Genesis chapter 13. We'll see what unfolds in Genesis chapter 13. Thank you again for tuning in to this week and reading Genesis chapter 12 with me. And remember to leave your comments below and share this channel. Download, click like, and share this channel with others. Thank you so much again, darling. Have a good week. Peace.